All right, guys. So I'm going to be reading from the book of John, chapter 8. My buddy Joe got up at club on Monday night and shared this story. And this is by far one of my favorite stories in the Bible. And I'll tell you why. Is because I believe that this story is almost in a way a summary of what the whole Bible is about. In this one story, it tells us everything we need to know in summary about what God is like and what he wants for us as people on earth. And I'll explain that at the end, but just keep that in mind as you hear this story. It starts off like this. It says that Jesus went across to the Mount of Olives, but he was soon back to the temple again. Swarms of people came to him, and he sat down and taught him. So you guys have seen this over and over and over again. Everywhere Jesus went, huge crowds would follow him and pile up behind him. So this day is no different than the rest, except for this. It says the religious scholars and the Pharisees had led a woman who had been caught in the act of adultery. And so I want you guys to be really clear, and if you can be mature and not laugh, what I'm trying to tell you right now is that these religious scholars, these priests of the day, they caught a woman sleeping with a man that was not her husband. And right in the act of doing that, they grabbed her, pulled her out, and it says this. It says they stood her in plain sight of everyone. So they found a woman cheating on her husband with another man. They pulled her right out of the bed, took her to Jesus. They didn't get her clothes first. They didn't check with her. They didn't let her shower. They didn't let her cover up. And they brought this naked woman out in front of Jesus. And it says this. They said, "Teacher, this woman was caught red-handed in the act of adultery. It says the law gives us order to stone such people. What do you say?" They were trying to trap him into saying something incriminating so that they could bring charges against him. Because you guys have heard these stories. Jesus has been saying stuff that's countercultural. People would say, hey, if someone harms you, harm them back. And he would say, actually, don't. Forgive them. You've heard the phrase, turn the other cheek. He said a lot of things that people didn't like. And so they were trying to get, how can we get the most obvious, offensive thing, bring it in front of Jesus, and trap him into saying what we'll know he'll say. And they know that Jesus will say, yeah, the law says stoner, so stoner. And they'll be like, see, you don't actually care about people. You obey the law just like the rest of us. But something really interesting happens. It says that Jesus bent down in the ground and wrote in the dirt with his finger. They kept badgering him, and he straightened up and he said, "The sinless one among you, go first, throw the stone." And bending down again, he wrote some more in the dirt. So Jesus, hearing these religious scholars, these smart people of the community, coming in and trying to say, hey, this is black and white, stoner. Jesus says, okay, whoever has not sinned, you go ahead and you throw first. So for those of you who don't know what stoning is, stoning back then was a punishment. It was a death punishment. Everyone would just pick up a rock and throw it at someone until they died. It said that was the punishment for cheating on your husband, for that woman. So Jesus said, if you've never sinned, you go ahead, you throw the first stone. And it says, hearing that, they walked away one after another, beginning with the oldest. You see, the oldest ones had lived a while. They had been through some stuff, you might say. And so they knew that they weren't perfect. And they said, you know what? I don't want to be held to that standard either, because I know that I'd be getting stoned right next to her. And so they drop their stone and they walk away, oldest down to the youngest. It said the woman was left there alone. And Jesus stood up and spoke to her. He said, "Woman, where are they? Does no one condemn you?" The woman says, "No one, Master." And Jesus says, "Neither do I. Go on your way, and from now on, don't sin." I love this story, like I said, because it's almost a summary of the story of God and mankind of all time. It's such a neat little story. It just captures it, and I'll tell you guys how. Because we said this over and over again, is that if you want to know what God's character is like, look at Jesus. You want to know what God thinks about you, look at what Jesus thinks about you. You want to know how God is going to respond to you, look at how Jesus responds to you. Because Jesus is the visible image of an invisible God, and we can get to know God's character by observing him. And so what are some of the things that we see in Jesus in this story that I want you guys to hold on to? These are huge. The first one has nothing to do with Jesus. I don't know how you guys feel, but I grew up being taught that God was judging me. I grew up being taught that God had a lot of negative things to say about me. And that God knew all my dirty stuff and that he wasn't happy about it. I don't know if you guys learned that or you were taught that, but I'm pretty sure most of us in the world are taught some form of that. That God is upset with you, you've done something wrong, and that you're at odds with God. But in this story, the most interesting things happen. It's not God at odds with this woman. It's the people at odds with this woman. And I want you guys to know that when you heard that from somebody, where they said, hey, God is mad at you, you're at odds with God, you're in trouble with God, most of the time, that's not a voice of God coming through that person to you. That person has their own anger with God. That person has their own stuff that they're processing through, and it's not about you. Jesus knew that, so he didn't even address the woman. I love that he dips down into the dirt and he starts writing in it. The Bible isn't clear about what he's writing or why he writes in the dirt. But what I love about that is Jesus, standing away from the woman, draws all the attention away from her. A naked woman who's embarrassed, who is scared, and she might die. Jesus sees this hurting woman, and he says, this isn't about you, this is about them. And he grabs their attention and takes it away from her. What a dignifying, honoring thing for God to do. See, that's not the message of God I heard. I didn't hear when I messed up that what God wanted to do was to give me back my dignity. That what God wanted to do was to serve me. He wanted to meet me where I was at. I didn't hear all that. And I assume that some of you guys may not have heard that before, and I want you to hear that now. And remember that when someone tries to tell you that God's mad at you, it's usually because that person feels like God is mad at them. And it's not about you. The second thing in that is don't blame God, not because he won't let you or because it's wrong, but because if this woman was just as mad at Jesus as she was at these men, she'd have had nobody. It says that in the end she was standing alone, but Jesus then approached. Don't be mad at God. I know a lot of you got reasons to be mad at God, but if you understand that amidst all the tough stuff that's going on in your life, that the God that created you, that loves you, that is for you, is with you, not against you, it changes your whole dynamic of life. It changes the whole way you think about everything. Another one is that Jesus didn't condemn her. I love this. He gave her a way out. It was up to her. At the end, when Jesus said, go and sin no more, he didn't say, oh man, you screwed up again. Really? Like this? Come on, you knew the rules, you broke them. Are you kidding me? Jesus' heart for this woman was go now and sin no more. And sometimes we've heard that message, but we didn't hear it from the right person. And someone made us feel like we'd be in trouble if we didn't and all this other stuff. But it's just not the way that God works. God loves you and he wants you to pursue a godly life. He wants you to pick it for yourself. And I think that if we feel like we're in trouble if we don't, we tend to get defensive. I mean, I get defensive about that sometimes too. Somebody tries to convince me that something, I'm trying to like not eat as much meat. My wife wants to go vegan and I'm wrestling with that a little bit. And so I even get defensive where she's like, hey, like that's not a good food for you to eat. And I'm like, stop trying to rule my life. And it's like, she's not. She's just trying to like be like, no, that's poison and you're putting that in your body. And I'm just like, okay. So Diet Coke's my worst. I'm barely hanging on a thread with that one. And the last thing with that I think is really cool is when Jesus said, go and sin no more, he said it after he defended her, gave her back her dignity, stood up for her, and took the attention of all these angry men with rocks in their hands, and he put it on himself. He didn't go up to the woman and be like, yeah, you really messed up. Why don't you get out of here and I'll talk to these guys? No, he said, look at me, don't look at her. Let's talk about this. He challenged them first. The last thing he did with her was tell her, go now and sin no more. And that's the cool part about the whole world and how God has a relationship with us, is if you're hearing first, God is saying, just stop sinning and your life will be fine, you're hearing the wrong dialogue. Because the first thing you should be hearing from God is, I am with you. I care about you. Don't listen to them. I am for you. I love you. I made you. You are exactly the way I designed you to be. I have a purpose for you. Your life matters. You're not a mistake. Those are the words that God wants you to hear first. And it's after falling in love with the God that created you that you can hear what he's trying to tell you, is that the life you're leading right now is not the one I designed for you. And if you continue to live it the way you're living, it's going to continue to hurt you. That's a much different message than the one we hear about God more often than not. That's way different. And I don't know if you guys have heard that pitch before, but I think that if you are patient and you let God step into your life, if you know and remember that those people that are throwing shade and throwing anger, that's not God, and that God has a message for you and he wants to restore your dignity and remind you how important you are, I think that most of you will be able to have a similar interaction like that woman got to have with God, of someone that cared so deeply for her that he was willing to put himself at risk. He was willing to stand up for her in the front of everybody that was against her. And that's the type of God that created you. He's for you, he loves you, and I just want to make sure you guys hear that. If you haven't heard that, like I said, that changes everything. So I'm going to